Got it. Well, I think let's jump on in. So before we get started, just welcome everyone. Thanks for joining. Let me introduce who we're sitting here talking to today. Pretty excited about today. Looking forward to it. Lyle is with us. He is the president of Integrus Leadership. Lyle, I gotta stop. I gotta say, when I was reading your bio, I felt the need to like read it in the, like the WWE voice of, as they're introducing, it was just such a good bio. I was like, I should just use that voice, but for everybody's sake, I'm going to skip that. But, you know, um, so much more than just president of Integrus. You're a pastor, you're pastor to pastors, you're an author, you've been a senior pastor, a church planner, a speaker. Most importantly, a fellow Dr. Pepper aficionado. So that's pretty good to have on there. But the reason we have Lyle here with us today, quite frankly, is because we are happy customers of yours. And I would definitely say raving fans. And so for those of you that were at the TouchPoint Summit down in Birmingham back in September, Lyle was our keynote speaker. For those that were unable to make it, you're definitely in for a treat today, and I'm looking forward to it. I can never get too much Lyle time, so I appreciate you joining us today, sir.
Morgan, it is great to be here. Now I want to scream, let's get ready to rumble.
Yes.
But Dr. Pepper, preferably with the real sugar, the pure cane sugar. I mean, that's
the stuff.
That's heavenly. Yeah, they're harder and harder to find. There used to be one distributor here in Texas, in Dublin, Texas, which was the original Dr. Pepper bottler, and they refused to go to the artificial corn syrup, and they were pure sugar. And now you can still find them, but they're like $6 a bottle. I mean, yeah, 6-pack is, $40 or something. But Christmas time, birthday, we go a little crazy. So
you got to do it.
Yeah.
So Lyle, you lead, you coach different teams, different leaders from all over the country, from churches to other areas of industry, everything in between. What are some hot topics you're hearing right now that people are asking about?
That Morgan, first off, that's a great question. I think there's, maybe 2 or 3 that I spend a lot of time on. One is leading up. I coach primarily senior pastors, CEOs, executive directors of nonprofits, owners of faith-based businesses, et cetera. Was just with some of the directors of the largest Christian schools in the country. But my team then is coaching a lot of, the vice presidents or the associate pastors, and so we've been having a lot of conversations about how do I lead up? I mean, it's all books are kind of written about leading down, how to lead a team or how to lead your organization. But if you're not sitting in the number one seat, how do you lead up to that? We're kind of front of mind for me. Another topic is we just completed what we call our Wonder Woman study. We've been working with a lot of really high capacity female leaders in ministry, faith-based nonprofits, Christian schools, et cetera. And so we collated the data, some of the best of the best of the best female leaders in ministry. So that's kind of a very specific context, looking at what characteristics do they have in common. And then I think the other one, ever since the pandemic, there's just been this accelerated transition. A lot of people retiring, baby boomers are getting older, transition, people are staying in ministry roles for shorter and shorter durations of time. So we talk a lot about transition. Of course, we help find leaders and we help build succession plans for sitting leaders. So transition would be another one. So that's a long
Okay.
answer to what was a pretty short question, but
It's
those are
perfect though.
big ones.
I'd love to jump in
Okay.
and just kind of, of course the easy question was what are you hearing? Uh, the longer answer is when you are asked about these, what do you see in the marketplace, and how are you helping different teams through them? What was your first one leading up?
Yeah, leading up, I think the first thing that I would say to anybody, and I mean, ultimately, we all report to somebody, right? I mean, I'm the president of Integrus. I report to a board. I'm the senior pastor at First Baptist Church in Franklin, Texas. I report to my personnel committee. I mean, we all report to somebody, but I think that when when you have a direct supervisor, a couple of things. Number one, we tell people is control the controllables. There are things that you control. You control your attitude, you control your effort, you control your skill level, you control the tone with which you communicate and the frequency you communicate. You are not a victim. We tell leaders all the time, you're never in a cul-de-sac. You're always at a three-way stop. You can keep going, doing what you're doing. You can make a turn and try to change it, or you can make a turn and decide to leave it. But you always have that agency. So the first thing is always focus on controlling the controllables. I've worked for an unpredictable leader, a boss who lacked self-control, who kind of, every day was a random act of improvement or a new priority. But still, even in that situation, you have the responsibility to control what you can control. The second thing is to seek clarity. I know a lot of leaders that are at that second tier get really frustrated going, there's no clarity in our organization. We don't, Ross isn't clear about what he expects from us. Ross isn't communicating. Well, wait a minute. Communication is a two-way street. So go seek clarity. Your boss doesn't always have to be the author. Maybe you need to be the author of some ideas or initiatives and then take it to them and let them be the editor. But really controlling the controllables and seeking clarity are two really, really important things when leading up. And then the last one that I would tell anybody in that situation is be very intentional about closing loops. As a senior leader myself, right? It's hard for us to assume the best. We're just not wired that way. And so, if I give something to one of my salespeople or I give something to one of my operations people and I don't hear back from them, I don't assume, hey, everything's great. We must have that taken care of. There's that little thing in my mind saying, did we, what's happening here? So, if you want to be a really high value employee, close loops, close loops, close loops. So that, those are a couple of things. Morgan, questions there or discussion points?
I would say what are the common any common mistakes you see here? Like
Yeah, I mean, one would be just having a sense of entitlement. Like, well, when do I get invited to that table? When do I get to start doing this? When do I? And what I would say is just be really great at what they've asked you to do right here, right now. And instead of, I mean, it's very front of mind because I had a coaching call this morning with a leader who's really frustrated. Like, I don't know why I don't get invited to go do events. And I said, well, be so good at your job that they go, why aren't they at our events? Why aren't we bringing them along with us? Sometimes the easiest way to get invited is to be really, really great at what you are doing, and let that be the
I love
audition
that.
for you doing more. I think the other thing is not thinking like an owner. I mean, Morgan, you're an entrepreneur. Every role you've ever had, you've thought like an owner. It's natural to you. It's not natural to everybody else. But, you know, we think about things, you know, when you own a company, you think about things like budget and time on task and, you know, return on investment. And the more you can do that as a direct report to the owner or a report to the direct report of an owner, the more you can think like an owner and behave that way, the more value you'll bring to your organization.
Now you have me wanting to rabbit hole, Lyle, because I love this. How do you now? I know I'm going the opposite way here from leading up to the opposite, but how how do you find those people?
Well, two things. You
Hmm.
know, one is um, stop hiring resumes. You know, I mean, we fall in love with resumes. And Morgan, all a resume tells me is the positions you've had. Doesn't tell me if
Right.
you're really good at them.
Yeah.
Doesn't tell me like, you know, and like you know, you just you know, you look at my bio and you know, a cynic would go, that guy can't keep a job. Like he's
Mhm.
done a lot of different things.
Yeah.
Um, so, you know, one is stop hiring resumes. And I think, you know, stop hiring out of desperation. Start looking for really good people now. I mean, I've got a list of probably 50 people that I've met along the way that I'm like, hey, if a conversation ever could happen about them maybe working at our church or in our company, I'd like to have that conversation with that person.
Yeah.
I really believe in hiring character. Um, you know, everybody makes mistakes. But Morgan, what I've learned about high character people is they don't make the same mistake twice. And I can live with that. If I hire a young, high character leader like you were when you were a little bit younger, Morgan, you made a ton of mistakes, but you didn't make
Sure.
it the second time. You learned from it. You didn't blame or justify your mistake. You're like, that was stupid. I'm not going to do that again. And I'm okay
There's
with
a
that.
lot of those.
Yeah, I call that tuition. I'll pay your tuition all day long if you'll grow from it. It's the leaders who won't grow. You know, we say somebody who's unwilling to grow is unfit to lead. I don't want to hire those people. So the other thing is, you know, I'm preaching the book of Luke, and we just started it last week. You know, and Luke tells Theophilus, you know, there were many eyewitnesses, and so I'm going to give you an orderly account. I only want to hire people that have eyewitnesses, which means either I've worked with them or somebody I really, really trust has worked with them. And, you know, we'll at Integris, we'll leave a position unfilled until we can fill it with a person that we all feel really, really good about. So we hire hard so we can lead easy.
I love that. And that the eyewitness, I love, but it definitely shrinks your pool, doesn't it?
Yeah.
You know, but you'd say it takes a lot more patience at the end of the day. Just that one rule does. So I love it.
But that's why, you know, you go back to being a good leader. And, you know, if you have a strategic plan and like I know TouchPoint, you've got stakes in the ground, how many leaders you're serving this year, how many churches you want to serve next year. And so you kind of start to think, well, in 3 years, I'm going to need four more just like this person. So we
Yeah.
start looking for them. We start asking around. We keep our eyes open. And you know, I love, you know, I mean, I love a good intern program. I mean, A, it's free help for a season, but B, you get dibs on some really bright young talent that
Yep.
if you get them early, then you know you bring them in and you raise them up in your organization with your cultural values and your DNA.
Yeah. Well, I could park here for a while, but you were talking about the women in leadership. The what did you call it? What was the name of the study you did?
Well, you know, so you're familiar because you've done it. We have a behavioral profile that's very unique. You know, it's only Integris and one other organization in the world is licensed to use it. And you know, it's unlike the personality based assessments, which I'm in no way criticizing. We love Enneagram, we love DISC. I mean, but this particular tool, the Integris 360, it's behavioral. So when you look at behavioral data, number one, it's very descriptive. But the most important thing is it's predictive, because the greatest predictor of future behavior is past behavior. And so we have over 10,000 people that have taken the Integrus 360 over the last decade. And we have over 1 million data points. And so what we look at is, we can look at any specific area. We could look at church planters, or we could look at kingdom-minded entrepreneurs, or we could look at worship leaders, or whatever. But because we've started to work with some just really impressive female leaders, and some of them at TouchPoint, in fact, we decided to take a subset of just high-performing female leaders. We called it the Wonder Woman profile. And we took their data and started to study it to see, what was unique to them? What characteristics or trends did they all tend to have? And there were really three. One is they were highly, highly organized and intentional. Now you could say that, well, Lyle, isn't that every leader? Probably. Entrepreneurs tend to be a little less organized and intentional. They take a few more risks. But it was interesting. Our 50, what we consider the highest performing female leaders in ministry that we have data on, and their need for order and structure was very, very high, which means they have a plan. They plan their day. They steward their time very well. They steward relationships. They're very intentional about who they meet with, when, and why. The second thing is their voices were prominent. So they listened well, but when they spoke, they were direct and decisive. Oftentimes, any of us as leaders, we can get lost. Our message can get lost in our words. And so one of the unique things with these female leaders is that they could say in a sentence what most people would say in a paragraph. And so highly organized, very intentional, direct, and decisive were some things that we saw. And again, I think the other thing about them is they were highly collaborative. So they truly went into situations thinking win-win, which, our data for all 10,000 certainly reflects that. But it was a unique data point, kind of a spike in the data when we saw where they scored on willingness to defer. So be direct and decisive, highly organized, very intentional, and always think win-win.
And where between the and I'm sorry, how many women were in that?
We did a subset of 50. So
50.
Yeah.
So if you were to take maybe you don't have this data, but how did that 50 differ from I'll say men and women, or men alone? Like where do you see?
Yeah. So a couple of things. So if you look at, our reference ranges overall, which is men and women, where this subset was slightly different is they were slightly higher on that intentionality, that need for order, and slightly higher on that think win-win. And, again, we're speaking, we're talking about, leadership across a broad horizon, but generally speaking, I would say my experience has been a lot of male leaders tend to be a little more win-lose, a little more territorial.
Agree 100%.
Please hear me. Not that I haven't come across plenty of highly competitive, draw a line in the sand female leaders, right? But generally speaking, I think that there's a greater tendency in men towards territorial, win-lose, starker contrast of right and wrong, instead of being a little more open-minded to conversations. And again, because of that aggression, maybe a little more reactive leadership and a little bit less intentionality. So.
Okay. So how do you how would you coach that different, or would you, maybe as a third? Um, like what, you have all this great data now, like how do you put some of that into action
Yeah,
with your staff, or with people you're talking to?
right. So, you know, again, the greatest predictor of future behavior is past behavior. So the first thing I'd want to look at is what are your current behaviors telling me? And, whether it's a younger or an older leader, whether it's male or female, let's start where you're at. And then let's also think about the context that you're in, because I mean, Morgan, you guys work with a wide variety of churches, and
Right.
you work with churches where, that wouldn't allow a woman to be ordained. I mean, that's not part of your theological belief, but there are other churches that you work with that totally embrace it, and husbands and wives co-pastor, and women are ordained, throughout their ministry. So that context I think matters a little bit. But I think every leader struggles to appropriately insert their voice into conversations. The bully or the bulldozer,
Yeah.
it's too much, it's too loud, it's too critical, it's too dominant. Others, it's almost like the three bears, right? The porridge is too hot, the porridge is too cold.
Yeah.
How do I get it just right? And but it's important that we continue to coach and grow that skill in ourselves and in others, because really, when you think about it, as a leader, the two things that help your voice be heard is, number one, your credibility. Do you know what you're talking about? And number two, your influence. Are people willing to hear what you say? One of my ahas over the last 18 months or so is just how critical likability is in leadership. People who are easy to like and well liked, we give them more grace. We tend to be more willing to hear what they have to say. And that's just, having good manners, being a good person. If you're going to stop at Starbucks on your way into work, check and see if anybody else wants anything. I mean, being a good corporate citizen is a huge part of leadership that often gets overlooked. And now I'm
Yeah.
down the
Might be the number one skill in life,
rabbit trail.
you know,
Yeah,
being
you know,
likable.
just be a decent guy. It's
Yeah.
not that hard. So, you know,
So the other topic you mentioned, which is transition.
yeah,
And with, I mean, I've heard the stats on this. The amount of pastors that are looking to retire in the next couple of years is just off the charts. And that data is probably generally just on senior pastors, but it probably flows all throughout the organization. So, um, tell me how what kind of questions you're getting, and what you're seeing in transition right now, or around transition.
yeah. Let's talk about some of those statistics really quickly, though, Morgan, because they're astounding. Um, you know, uh, 1,700 people leave vocational ministry every month in this country, most of them voluntarily. So, when we talk about transition, it's just not the senior pastor.
Right.
I've had two student pastors in the 2 years that I've been at First Baptist Franklin. And I mean, that has a massive impact because, when you're dealing with 14, 15, 16, 17 year olds, it takes time to build a real relationship. And I've had two great guys, and life circumstances just have caused them to have to step away. But I mean, it makes ministry significantly harder. And then you add to the fact that 4,500 churches will close in America this year. So that's 80 a week, Morgan. So, this Sunday, statistically, little over 80 churches will have their last service. And those churches have staffs, and those staffs now are in transition. So there's a tremendous amount of turnover in ministry roles. And I would say this: the thing we have to remember going back to, hey, be a decent human being, is that these statistics, they're all people, and all
Yeah.
change involves loss, and all loss has to be grieved. And so, when you walk into, I mean, like TouchPoint, you go into a church that's had two senior pastors in the last 4 years. I mean, you're walking into a grieving church. That's a grieving staff, because a psychologist will tell you it takes about 2 years to work fully through all the stages of grief. And so, I'm just about there, and now this guy leaves again, and now we're doing it again and again. Or if I'm a part of a large church staff, but our pastor, we're seeing turnover in worship and turnover in students and turnover in kids, and the people I work with are changing constantly. So all change involves loss, and all loss must be grieved. Even good loss, right, there's going to be some grief. And so one of the things that has really helped me is to realize that although a lot of people appear resistant to change, what I've learned is, in fact, it's not a resistance to change. It's actually the resistance to the chaos that comes from change. Because every time you have a transition, you catapult your organization into a bit of chaos. I mean, I'm sitting here, I'm an empty nester. I'm sitting here in the house where our kids grew up. My wife and I don't need this big a house anymore. Upstairs, and every other room upstairs doesn't get used all week long, usually all month long, unless one of our kids comes home for a visit. And so, do we need it? No. Do I love the idea of downsizing to maybe a nice little duplex on a golf course? Morgan, I love that idea. But when I think about the 90 or 120 days of chaos that it would take to get this house ready to sell it, pack it up, get moved into a new place, right? That chaos, I'm like, nah, we're good where we're at right now. And so it's the chaos. So if you're leading in an organization or part of an organization going through change, I would say three things. Number one, communicate to people the timeline of the change. Like, hey, we're going to, this remodel, again, it's a change. So there's going to be grief, even though you're going to have a better looking building when you're done. We're going to be in a temporary space for 6 months or 9 months or whatever. Communicate a clear timeline. Number two, remind people of what's not changing, because there can be a tendency to overreact and be like, everything's changing. No. We're moving you, or we've lost this one person, but this part of your day-to-day isn't changing at all. So minimize the change by reminding them what's going to stay familiar, give them a timeline. And then the last thing is help paint a picture, right? The mind thinks in pictures of the value or the win of the change. We're going to go through some remodel at my church, and part of it, to help them, I'm like, so it won't be this Christmas, but can you imagine next Christmas what it's going to look like when we get to celebrate Christmas Eve in that facility, or Easter of 2026 when we get to do services in that facility. So paint a picture of where you're going, because the word that a counselor is always looking for, Morgan, is through. When somebody talks about, man, you don't know what I'm going through, it's what I'm going through is so hard. As long as they hear the word through, they're actually pretty encouraged. It's when people talk about how stuck they are that there's a problem.
Okay.
Those are a lot of words. I'm sorry. I can get.
No, I love it. I love it. And that's that. I mean, just based off the numbers you just shared, the stats, we all are going through it, have been through it, will be going through it, or know somebody going through it. And I didn't intentionally use your through number or through word there again, but I just did. So,
True. Yeah. Well,
so
and I think it's going to be, I mean, when you look at the projection of, the declining numbers of church attenders right now, the what we're seeing in some of the generational studies of millennials, Gen Z, now the alphas, it life in churches and in some cases faith-based nonprofits could look very, very different moving
mhm,
forward. And I'm not saying better or worse. Um, I, some people get a little afraid when they hear like, wow, I mean, there could actually be some persecution of the church in America in the future. But Morgan, you've traveled the world. I mean, the places where the church is facing some of the most severe persecution is where revival is breaking out,
yeah,
I mean, I think there's opportunities for all of us who, carry the burden of advancing the gospel. It just may not look the same. And that's why understanding this transition and change and grief process is so important, because it helps us, here comes our word again, move through to the
bro.
next opportunity. It prepares us for what's next.
Well, sir, I appreciate it. And I have to tell you something. So, and I promise I didn't do this because you and I were jumping on this meeting, but I have very, very few things on my desk. One of them that always lives here is my Integrus report. So helps me remind myself where maybe I could improve a little bit here and there.
Well, the great thing about that is we all have blind spots.
Yeah.
I last night we went to a fundraiser, and it was a bit of a dress up event. And I mean, I live in Texas, so a lot of guys had cowboy boots on, and there was one guy, and I noticed him because he was very, very, very sharp dresser, but he had part of his pants stuck in his cowboy boot, like he didn't get his pants all the way over his boot. So
Yep.
it's like he was out on the range. And I just walked up to him and just kind of tapped him on the shoulder. And I said, hey, I don't know if you're making a fashion statement, but your pant leg is stuck in your boot. And he's like, oh my gosh, thank you. And I think about that, with all of us. And that's why things like the Integrus 360, that's why cultivating relationships where people really are truth tellers to us can be helpful, because we do have some blind spots. And and Morgan, you've held a variety of roles in your life, and some behaviors that were really valued when you were a younger kind of a mid-level employee, like higher deference and higher self-control. As you become more and more responsible and have more autonomy and authority in your leadership roles, those behaviors don't always serve you as well as they did in that other role. And I think that's what's so important, even as a pastor, as I've led my church through some growth, now, I mean, when I started, I was very hands-on, but now as we've grown, I'm coaching the shepherds who are shepherding the sheep more than I'm shepherding myself. So I'm still shepherding, I'm just shepherding a different population. And that's a different skill set. So we all need to be lifelong learners.
Yep. Well, sir, uh, how can people get in touch with you? I know, so you were down at, Summit with us,
Yep.
and I believe you connected with a couple churches down there already that you met, which is just awesome. And I know more people want to reach out or possibly get slides or some of your ideas from today. How can we do that?
Well, a couple of things. Number one, every time we do something, we have a note taker assigned. And so if you sat down today and maybe I just talked too quick, or you're listening in your car as you're going between meetings, if you need a copy of the notes, there's a QR code there. just scan that, send the email in, and we'll get you the notes. If you'd like a coaching session, you think about it, every high performer, whether it's in business or athletics. Morgan, there's a Forbes study of the top 40 CEOs in America, and they were looking at what characteristics do they all share. The number one commonality was that they had coaches. Many of them had a life coach and a spiritual advisor and a nutrition coach. And many of them had multiple. But if you'd like a coaching session, just sitting down with one of our coaches, I think Adam Hatton is who we created some capacity for. You just scan the QR code on the right, and it's a free session. It's just an opportunity to talk a little bit about your leadership role. Adam has been an executive pastor at multiple churches, a trusted advisor to so many in faith-based world. And so Adam would just love to get on the call with you. One of our core values is to cross the road. Our mission is advancing the gospel by equipping kingdom-minded men and women for greater impact. So we'll talk to anybody. If you think my nonprofit's too small, my church isn't big enough, Integrus won't be interested, that's the devil lying to you, not us. Please reach out. We'd love to have a conversation with you. And I think my contact or our contact, either one of those QR codes will get you in contact with our people. And again, we love leaders, and everybody's a leader because leadership is simply behavior that influences others and drives outcomes. So again, if you're like, I'm just the kids, or I'm just the assistant youth, or I'm just an admin, please just is a 4-letter word. That word, like all other 4-letter words, need to be eliminated from your vocabulary. Reach out to us because we'd love to connect with you.
That's awesome. Today, and this is a little housekeeping here. We've mentioned Summit a couple times. Today is the last day for early bird registration for next year's Summit down in Northwest Arkansas at Cross Church. So if your team is going, prices go up tomorrow. So jump on it today. And Lyle, I believe you all will be there and put together another offer for some folks.
Yeah. So if you saw Morgan hold up his Integrus 360 a few minutes ago, any executive pastor, and if you have that title or you serve in that role, we would love to have you scan this QR code, because if you're coming to Summit, we're actually going to spend time specifically with executive pastors, and we want to offer you a free profile. This is the same profile we use with NFL quarterbacks, Navy SEALs, fighter pilots, Chick-fil-A. It's free. It's about 15 to 20 minutes of your time, but you'll get a coaching session with this data. And we just want to, we know the value that an executive pastor brings to the table. So many members of our team, I've been an executive senior pastor. We know that senior pastor has a lot of ideas, but it's always our responsibility to make them happen. So this is our opportunity to bless you and encourage you, but also pour into you when we come to Summit. And if you've never been to Summit, 2 things. Number one, again, I think it's a lie from the enemy that you don't have time to go to this thing for a couple of days. TouchPoint does a phenomenal job of pouring into their people. And it's not one of those brutal sit and get for 8 hours a day, 3 days, sitting in a room. It's very interactive. It's highly, highly relational. You're going to make good friends. You're going to make a ton of great contacts. And you're going to walk away more empowered and better equipped to serve your church if you come to Summit.
Also, now I feel like after you say that, Lyle, I feel like I need to send you a.
Well, remember, I'm also a satisfied customer. Our church uses TouchPoint. I use my app every single day. We
That's
love it.
awesome. Well, wanted to throw out, if anybody has any questions, feel free to throw them in the chat there for Lyle. We have a couple minutes. So while we are waiting to see if we have any questions, Lyle, I was going to ask you, uh, what do you do? One of the things we hear sometimes, I promise everybody that this is not coming from me, but if we have a boss that's just so super hard to work with, you have that just, you butt heads, they're hard, not easy to work with. What kind of advice do you have there?
Two things. I mean, one is to understand this. I mean, the art of reframing, Morgan, is changing the way you're looking at it to help you deal with it better. It's not turning you're not turning lemons into lemonade, but it just helps you deal with it better. And I would say this: fear drives most inappropriate behavior. So
Yes.
if you see a boss who's a tyrant, a narcissist, a knucklehead, whatever, I would say this: first thing is understand there's something there that's creating that, because nobody wants to be um, uh, difficult to work with or difficult to work for. They either don't know better or there's something getting in the way of it. So I always try to lead with a little bit of empathy. But the second thing is this: again, go back to controlling what you can control, and realizing you always have an option. When I went through that season of working through for a very, very difficult leader, one of the things that I reminded myself every day was, I'm choosing to get in the car and drive to this job. I have other options. Everybody on this webinar, you're very employable. You have gifts and talents. You're choosing to do that. So, understanding that you have agency. And then the last thing is, a lot of times I'll talk to people and they'll say, well, he ain't going to change. She'll never change. She's always been this way, whatever. Have you had a conversation with them? Have you even tried? Because sometimes we behave in certain ways because we lack awareness. And a bully's never been told, you kind of bully us. And sometimes they're the most surprised person in the room. So reframe, remember you're choosing to do this right now. And number three, have you ever tried to give them feedback? And if they don't receive that, that's not on you. You did the right thing. So
Yeah, we did have a question come in here it's kind of around mentorship. I've been lucky, I can say, I've had good spiritual mentors and business mentors my whole life. But, for those that don't, do you have any advice on how to find somebody?
Well, I'm looking at Christy's question, and I mean, I see the mentor, but it's specifically for older singles, which is I mean, Christy, first off, props to you. That might be the most specific question I've ever been asked on a webinar. Christy, I would say this, and one of the things there are 5 universal needs: community, security, clarity, authority, and dignity. And when you're talking about older singles, I think dignity becomes a real issue. If they're singles, they may be lonely, so they may lack some community as well. But there's the dignity piece of, do I still bring value? Do I, am I, can I still make a difference in my church or in my community or whatever? And so I think, when I lead, I always try to think about those 5 needs. But I think the dignity piece with older singles and the community piece would be really, really important. So helping them understand how they matter and why they matter, even having them start to articulate with some intentionality, what are some lessons you've learned as a parent, or what are some lessons you learned in your 30s that you wished you had learned in your 20s, or but getting them to articulate things that they realize that they do still walk in some wisdom and some discernment that a younger generation may not. But I try to keep them really connected and really, really focus on the dignity piece. Generally speaking, Morgan, when it comes to mentorship, um, I think the more specific the feedback, the better. I think a lot of times people are like, "Hey, would you be my mentor?" And okay, what do you want me to help you? Like there needs to be. We need to work towards a specific purpose. So in mentoring relationships, ask really, really specific questions. Be ready to give really specific feedback, rather than just kind of the general, how you doing? Save your money for a rainy day. That doesn't help. Tell me how to save my money. Tell me where to put that money that I saved. Tell me, when it's okay to spend some of that money that I've saved. Those kinds of things.
One more here. Do you do retreats?
I love retreats. Yes, absolutely. And I mean,
what does that look like?
Well, typically there are three elements to a retreat. Number one is just the getting away, right? I mean, in the Bible, you see this rhythm of going out and coming in. We go out to war, we come in. We go plant a crop, we bring in a harvest. We go on a missionary journey, we come in. I think, all of us need to understand there needs to be a time to come in, to rest, to reflect, to plan. So when we do retreats, I like to do it kind of in three phases. Number one, assessment. What are we doing well? What are we not doing? I mean, we ask a lot of questions of, what's working, what's not working, what's confusing, what's frustrating. I just led a leadership team retreat, and we talked about, would you rehire every person on your team enthusiastically in the same role at the same money? And then, this was kind of an HR retreat. Then we started looking at their staffing board and got into some really good conversations. So start is some assessment or reflection. And number two is, what tools that you can walk out of the retreat. Sometimes when people retreat, the goal is let's have a great 3 days. Those 3 days aren't great if you don't walk out with tools that help you the other 362 days that year. So let's take an assessment of where we are. Let's give some tools to help people move forward from where they are. And then the last thing is always the community piece. My frustration with the church, the big C church, Morgan, is we tend to live in silos. That's what I love about TouchPoint. I mean, you guys are intentional about not siloing. You want to build partnerships like you have with Integrus, but not just the big C church gets siloed, and this church on this corner won't talk to that church on that corner, but also within our churches. Children's ministry, I mean, they're across the street and nobody ever talks to them. And students, they're outside in the trailer making noise and, putting stuff and marshmallows in their mouth, and nobody wants to do anything with them. Like, let's unite. Let's come together. So every retreat, I'm very intentional about doing things that really bind us together as a team. I mean, I do adult show and tell. We call it Sentimental Circle, Morgan. It's one of the most powerful things you'll experience ever as an adult. We ask everyone, bring one sentimental item and tell me your story. And I mean, to see that, what's amazing is you realize that we really were created for connection, and it's powerful. So anyway, that's probably a longer answer on retreats, but man, I love getting away with people.
You definitely answered it, sir. Lyle, we're a couple minutes over. I figured we would be though, but man, I just thank you. It's always a pleasure. Love getting to be able to sit down and chat with you and just pick your brain. And thank you for, um, just breathing into people the way you do. And it's truly been an honor to get to know you over the last year and a half. And um, already looking forward to Birmingham, or not Birmingham, excuse me, uh, Northwest
Fayetteville.
Arkansas. Yes, to be able to see and shake your hand again, sir.
It'll
So,
be great. It will be great. Well, thank you for this opportunity. And, to the leaders that have stayed on with us, thank you for what you do. You are truly making a difference every single day. You may not feel it, taste it, touch it some days, but one day we'll know. One day we'll know truly the impact that our efforts have had. So bless you and thank you for what you do in your communities, in your churches, and in your organizations.
amen, brother.